Alright guys, this is going to be part 2 of my short little workbench series here, and in this video I want to go over a little bit of the basic design and build considerations. Now I don't think I mentioned it in the first video, but I'm really not going to show you all the cutting and fastening, screwing things together, as those steps are fairly straightforward and in my opinion self-explanatory. Basically I'm just going to kind of go over what I did to get to this point, and maybe throw out a few dimensions here or ideas of how I arrived at those dimensions. And again, hopefully that'll be enough to kind of get you guys going. And maybe towards the end of this video, when it's all together, I'll try to give you a more specific bill of materials as far as how many 2x4s and whatnot you need. But basically, this bench has 3 main parts, or 3 separate assemblies. One will be the uprights. You'll assemble those first, and then you'll make a frame for the number of shelves you're going to want. Now you probably could get away with just using one frame for a shelf and then maybe doing some single stringers for the long and the shorts, and really kind of bypassing the whole framing of the bottom shelf. But personally, I want at least 2 shelves, so I'm going to build at least 2 frames. So that'll be the second part. And third will be the sheeting for the shelves themselves, or the bench top. And for that I used 4x8 sheets of OSB, which I more or less ripped in half, so they're just under 2 feet wide. Now your frame you want to build based on your sheet or your OSB that you're going to end up with. So however long this ends up being and however wide, that's what your frame is going to match up to, as it's going to go directly over the top. Now personally, on some of my workbenches I do like to have a removable or replaceable tempered hardboard top, as they're fairly durable and very cheap to replace. So I'm going to limit the length from outside to outside of this bench to 8 feet, so that I can go buy a 4x8 sheet of hardboard, 1/4 inch hardboard, and put that over the top if I want to. As far as the width, it just needs to be 4 feet or less, but again, since I'm choosing to rip a 4x8 sheet in half to maximize material, that's what we're going to base the inside dimensions off of, which in this case will be 23 3/4. So from outside to outside, again, I want to have roughly 8 feet or 96 inches. From inside to inside, as it's going to be protected on the edges by the insides of these corners, I want the 23 3/4. So we have to do a little bit of thinking here and subtract the width of our 2x4s, but I'll go over that in a moment. Now, the next thing you want to figure out, once you have your length and your width determined, is how high do you want to make it? And that's going to be the same dimension that you use for the uprights. Now, height of benches really depends on how tall you are and what you're going to use it for. If you're going to be using or mounting any tools to it, how high off the ground those need to be. So there's a number of factors that go into that. I really can't figure that out for you. But for my bench, I wanted something kind of in the middle. So I chose 34 inches, which for me, that's roughly right about the bottom of my belt, or right at about waist height, which is typically a pretty good height for my workbenches and what I prefer. So again, first step, you want to cut your uprights, and that's going to be 8 identical pieces to whatever the height of your bench is. Now again, remember, if you're going to be using a 1/4 inch hardboard liner for the top, you can give or take a 1/4 inch. It's really not that critical for me, so I just rounded it off right at 34 inches. And if I want to add that 1/4 inch, it shouldn't really make a difference when it's all said and done. So again, 8 identical pieces, in this case 34 inches long, and then fastened together at the corners like so. And that'll give you your 4 uprights. Now another thing I did, and just a real quick tip that helps tremendously with assembly, I did take some cutoff pieces left over from my 8-foot 2x4s when I cut the frames, and I just made some little riser blocks, and those serve a couple of purposes for me. One, it gives me an exact height off the ground at each corner of 3.5 inches. There's really no extra guesswork there, measuring, marking lines, clamping things, and kind of getting everything situated around. It kind of does all the work for me. The other nice thing, and probably more important thing, is that it gives a load-bearing surface for that shelf to go on, where you're not just relying on the shear strength of the screws that you're going to put through your boards into your shelf. So just kind of a quick tip there. It'll come out of your scrap and works very nicely. And the way I have these situated, you could turn them probably either direction, but I chose to turn kind of the long ways on the short side of the bench for a couple of reasons. I think it looks a little better, and also this joint here is supported by that block under both sides. So just something to consider. Now your frame assembly is pretty straightforward. It's just a basic frame construction. 2 screws per on each side should be plenty. And for this one I've got 5 joists or stringers, whatever you want to call them, holding things together. Now you could go more. I probably wouldn't go less. Some guys like to go 16 on center, as it's a little more traditional, especially for 1/2 inch OSB. But the way this bench is going to be put to use and put together, that really should be more than enough for my purposes, and we'll save on a little material there. Again, if you want to, though, by all means, go 16 on center, 18, 12. It really shouldn't matter. I think these are about 22, 23 on center. And again, the length is determined by your overall outside dimensions minus 3, or twice the thickness of this 2x4, as you have 1 on each side. So 1.5 plus 1.5 is 3, minus 8 feet. That's 93 inches for the long parts. And then your insides, since that top is going to set inside these corners, is going to be whatever the width of your OSB or your top is, which is for me 23 3/4. Again, minus 1.5 inches per side. So 20 3/4 is what I came up with for these center pieces. And get them as square as straight as you can, and you should be alright. You might have to tweak the frame a little bit here or there, but ultimately shouldn't be a big deal. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to secure these uprights to the bottom shelf now that I got my riser blocks already in place. Get that nice and secure. I'll go ahead and set my bottom OSB panel and secure that. And then I may add another riser block for the top just to have more load bearing capability there. And then I'll put my top, flush it all up, and I'll resume with a part 3.